start with a very important subject in Java, arrays. Now, an array is a collection of items. If you're familiar with array lists, it's something like an array list, but I'm going to talk about the differences between an array and an array list in one of the subsequent lectures. So, an array is a collection of items. What kind of items? Can be primitive type items or object reference type items. In other words, you can have an array of ints, a primitive type, an array of chars, an array of booleans, an array of doubles. All these are primitive type arrays. On the other hand, you can have an array of objects, like an array of strings, an array of employees, an array of books, an array of computer objects. Okay, for today's lecture, for this particular session, I'm going to focus on primitive type arrays. Okay, I'll talk about object reference type arrays in the next session, and you'll be able to see the differences. Now, treat an array as an object in Java. So, which means that an array variable, or a variable which stores the address of an array, is to be treated as an object reference variable. Let me give an example. Now, what I've just written is a statement which does two things. Okay, the part on the left here does not create the array. The part on the left here declares a variable. Okay, the variable name is A. And what is the type of A? A is not an int variable. In other words, A does not store an int. But A's type is int array. Notice the square brackets. So A will store the address of an array object. And what kind of array object? An array object which stores ints only. Okay, so like what I've said just now, treat an array variable, in this case A, as an object reference variable. Okay, because it will store the address of an array object. Now this part on the right uses a new keyword to create an array object. Okay, in Java we create a new object using a new keyword. Arrays are objects, so we use the new keyword to create an array object. What kind of array is this? An array which stores ints. And how many slots? I prefer to use the term slots. How many slots are there in this array? Remember, an array is a collection. So how many slots are allowed in this collection? 3. Okay, you predetermine the size of an array. That means the number of slots of an array when you create the array object. This can't change. In other words, when you create an array with 3 slots, you cannot change the number of slots. Oh, oops, okay. Wrong. You cannot change the number of slots to 4 or 5. So what has been done is, let me draw this visually here. Okay, the left part here, I've declared an array object reference variable which stores the address of an array object. On the right here, I've created the array object with 3 slots. Each slot stores an int. Now, by default, each slot will store 0, false, or null, depending on what type of array this is. In this case, int arrays will store zeros in all the slots by default. Now, there are 3 slots. The first slot is what we call slot 0. Second slot is slot 1, and the third slot is slot 2. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, in computer science, we like to start counting from 0. So there are 3 slots, but the last slot is slot number 2. Now this number, okay, is what we call an index, the index of the array. Okay, and this array object's address is then stored using the equal sign, the assignment operator, to A, which is the the object reference variable. So this is the visual picture of the outcome of this statement. Now, how do we retrieve elements or items, or in this case integers, from the slots? As simple as this. This will retrieve the second, the second element at slot number 1. Alright, so I can do simple things like system.out.println, okay, A1, and this will print 0. How do I set the values in the slots? I can do this equals to 9. Okay, and this will result in the 0 here at slot number 1 or the second slot being changed to 9. And if I try to retrieve the value again, A1, this will print out 9. This prints 1. This prints 0. This prints 9. Okay, so this is the way to retrieve the value in a slot. This is the way to assign a value into a slot. You use the square brackets. Okay. Now, just a quick note here. This is the way we declared an array variable, correct? A. Now, Java is very flexible. This is also correct. Although I'll recommend that you follow the first way of declaring an array variable. Okay, this is correct. It works. Okay, but it's more, the makers of Java actually decided to keep this syntax because this is the syntax C programmers are used to. Okay, but this is preferred as far as Java is concerned. Okay. Now, let me give you another example. This time I'm going to code it out. An example of another primitive type array. I've created a char array. Okay, on the left here, which is highlighted, I've declared a variable called C. The type for C is, char array, not char. In other words, C stores the address of a char array object. C is object reference variable. This part here on the right actually creates the array, and there are 3 slots. Let's change it to 10 slots. Okay, slot 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to slot number 9. There are 10 slots in this array object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign a value to slot 1 or assign a value to slot 0. Okay, the first slot. Okay, I can do stuff like that. Okay. They don't have to be assigned in order, of course. I can do stuff like T. Okay. So the remaining slots with index 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 will have the default value stored in the slot. Okay, the default value for a char type is 0. Okay, not numeric 0, but 0, the very first element in an ASCII table. Okay, I can retrieve the values by using the square bracket notation as well. For example, let me try to do this. Let me save this and try to compile this. All right. I'm getting Z. All right, because Z is the one stored at slot with the index 3. Because I've just assigned Z to be stored at the slot with index 3. That means the 4th slot. Now, what happens if you try to access a slot which is not existent? In this case, your array has got 10 slots. Let's try to access the -1th index. A compilation error, which you see quite frequently. So get used to it. Java.lang.array index out of bounds exception. Be familiar with this compilation error. This is not a compilation error. This is a runtime error. Okay. Compilation works. They do the checking during runtime. So this is a runtime error. Get used to it. Array index out of bounds. The array index is this number. -1, and they tell you that -1 is the index, it is out of bounds. There's no such slot. Alright, and they tell you that it's at line 11. Now, same thing if you try to access slot number 10, which is the 11th slot. Remember, we always start counting from 0 for arrays. You get the same runtime exception, array index out of bounds exception, and they tell you that you're trying to access the array slot with index 10, okay, which is the 11th slot, and there's no such slot. The reason is because your array has got only 10 slots, okay, index 0, 1 all the way to 9. So be familiar with this runtime exception. If you meet this, the reason is quite obvious. You are trying to access a slot which does not exist. Okay. Now arrays are powerful because you can use for loops to insert values or to retrieve values. Let me give you another example of a primitive type array, a boolean type. New boolean, 5 elements. Now by default, all the slots in B will be set to false. Alright, will be set to false. So what I can do is I'm going to write a for loop okay, to set all the values, all the slots to true. B I equals to true. Now before that, what is this? Now I was saying that treat an array in Java as an object. Okay, and objects may have methods and attributes. Now for the case of arrays, there is no method at all, but one useful attribute, and this is a public attribute. You can just use it directly. It is called length. b.length gives you the number of slots, also known as the size of the array or the length of the array. In this case, b.length will be 5. Okay, we do not want to fix it at 5 here because we are not sure. Sometimes if I pass you an array object, you need to use its length attribute to retrieve the number of slots. Okay, it may not be always 5. In this case, it is obviously 5. Huh? So I'm using a for loop here. During the first iteration, I here will be 0. During the second iteration, I here will be 1, and so on until I becomes 4. Okay, next time when I is 5, okay, this condition will be false and you will jump out of the for loop. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a simple for loop to set all the items, all the slots in B to true. Okay. Similarly, I can use a for loop to retrieve all the values of the array. Okay, I can do system.out.println. Okay, I plus is bi. So during the first iteration, it's going to print 0 is true. bi stores a boolean. The second iteration, when I is 1, you print I is true, and so on. Let me save this, and let's try to compile and run it as expected. Okay. So before we end, let me end off with a simple example. The question here is, I have a new class called demo, public class demo. All right, which takes in, okay, write a method that takes in an int array and returns the sum of all the numbers in the array. So let me save this as demo first. Save as demo.java. Let me overwrite public int. It returns a sum, right, which is an int. Calculate sum. Int square bracket I. Okay, I will be the variable which stores the int array. So I can use a for loop for int Oh no, let's not use I lah. Array. Int I equals to 0. I smaller than a dot length. Remember, no brackets. Length is not a method. Length is an attribute. Okay, before that, I have to declare a variable called sum, which needs to be returned. At the end, I'll return sum. Okay, so during each iteration, I will try to retrieve, AI and add it to sum. Okay, simple as that. Now, let me change my test to create an instance of demo, and I'm going to call d.calculate sum. And before that, I'm going to create my array, right? So int array equals to new int. Let's say there are 5 elements inside. So I'm going to pass into calculate sum int array. So I'm going to set the values in int array 88. Okay, 90, 1, minus 2, or the index. Okay, and this is the last one. Remember, we do not have int array index 5 because the size of the length is 5 only. 3. So what I've done here, I've created an array object of ints. I've set the values in each slot. The first slot we have 88, second slot we have 90, and so on. I'm going to pass this array object over to this method called calculate sum. Okay, which will go through using the for loop all the integers in the array and return the sum. Okay, now look here, this method called calculate sum takes in an array object. Look at the type here. It does not take in an int. It takes in an int array. Alright, you may get this may need some getting used to initially, the syntax. So wow, lots of errors. Let's take a look. Ha! Incompatible types. Line 5 of test. Do you see why is this an incompatible type? What is required is an int. What is found is an int array. Line 5 here. So it's a typo mistake on my part. Now I've declared a variable of type int, not int array, and I'm trying to assign the address of the array object to int array. Wrong types. So this will work. Int array should be declared as a variable of type int array. Compile again. This time it works. Let's run it. And the sum of all the elements is 180. Okay. Can do more complex things. For example, I can write another method. This time returns all the even numbers. Okay, in the input array as an array of ints. This is a bit more complex. So what happens is I'm supposed to write a method which takes in an int array, okay, in this case a, and which returns another int array. So the return type looks like this. Sieve out even numbers. Oh, see, not even ints. Okay, the method name is called sieve out even ints. So I'm taking in an int array. I'll go through all the elements. I will retrieve only the even numbers and put them into another array which I have to return. Look at the return type of the method. It's int square bracket. It returns an int array. Now, a bit more complex. There are a few ways to solve this problem. The complexity lies in one fact that as you are sieving out, as you are going through the original array A, you do not know how many elements will be even, and hence you cannot create a array to return. You can't do this. Okay, to return even arrays, even ints. The problem is you do not know what is the size of even ints. Of course, the worst case scenario is the size of even ints cannot be bigger than the size of a, right? So okay, you can do something like that. Let's try. This is one way to do it. So during the iteration, I need to have a counter. Okay, counter will keep track of which slot in even ints, okay, we are actually pointing to. So during iteration, I'm going to go through every element in A, and I will check if AI, how do you check whether it's even? Okay, mod 2 equals 0. That means when the number mod 2 gives you 0, that means it's an even number. If this is the case, I want to add it to even ints. Counter equals to AI. Alright, and of course I need to increment my counter. So the next time I'm going to add the next even element from A into the correct slot in even ints. Okay, now the problem with this solution is that the int array returned will contain zeros at the end. Okay, let's assume that A has a size of 10. The problem here is I'm fixing the size of even ints to 10 slots, where in reality there may not be 10 even numbers unless all the numbers in A are even. Okay, if there are some odd numbers, you're going to have the tail end of even ints, the slots there will be zeros, the default values, and that's a problem because you do not want you are getting zeros in the returned array. All right, so there are a few ways to solve this problem. One very rudimentary way is at the end here. Okay, I will create a new array with the correct size, because at the end now you know what is the size. What should be the correct size? And the correct size is counter. All right, the correct size is counter. So I can do this. Create a new array to be returned. Okay, we call this to return, for lack of a better name, equals to new int. And do we know the size now? Counter. Alright, and I'm going to return to return. And I'm going to copy all the elements in even ints to return. Okay, so I use another for loop for int I equals 0, I smaller than to return dot length, which is counter actually, I plus plus, and I'm going to do this to return I equals to even ints I. So during the first iteration, to return 0 equals to even ints 0. I'm copying the value in the first slot of even ints to the first slot into return. During the second iteration, I is going to be 1. So to return 1 equals to even ints 1. So I'm copying this value into the array to be returned. And this will happen, okay, until I've reached the last element in to return. And at the end, I return to return. So this is one way to solve the problem. Let's try it. Let's see if this works. Okay, I'm going to call sieve out even ints. Alright, and before that, are there even ints in the first place? There's 1, 2, and 3. Okay, there are 3 even ints. Okay, I'm going to store it in this variable called even, and I'm going to try to print out all the elements in even dot length to prove that my method is working. System.out.println I. Okay, so only the even numbers should be printed out. Let's try this. 0, 1, 2. Oh, this is silly. I'm printing I wrong. It should be okay. Even I. 88, 90, and -2. So it seems that my method is working. My see out even ins method is working. Okay, there are 3 elements: 88, 90, and -2 returned. In even's length is 3. Okay, so this is only one way to solve the problem. Okay. So in the next session, I'm going to talk about arrays of the type object reference type. Even before that, there's one very last thing which I forgot to mention. There's a shortcut way to initialize an array. Initialize means to put in the initial values into the slots. Okay, and this works. 88, 90, 1, -2, 3. Now this statement itself is the same as lines 5 to line 10 all added up together. Let me say again, this is a shortcut notation. Alright, for you to create an array object, they look at the type, these are numbers, these are ints, and they look at the number of elements here to determine the size of the array. Okay, so this line 12, does all the work of lines 5 to 10. Okay, that's another way to write it. Both are acceptable. Both are acceptable. Now the only difference between the way line 12 works and the way line 13 works is that line 12, okay, you can't do this. You can't do this. Wrong. You get a compilation error. X, alright, and then X equals to. You can't do this on separate lines. Okay, this is wrong. You get a compilation error. But this is okay. Y equals to new int, okay, 88, 90, 1, -2, 3. So this is okay. Alright, so this is a shortcut notation. Either one will work. So that's the end of this session.